What I'm going to try and do very briefly is, in a sense, give an idea of the kind of work that I've been committed to for many, many years. But it does raise, I think, a very important area of work. I think it's quite interesting that we've had across Europe the worst economic crisis since the 1930s. Yeah? Mass unemployment. We've had social movements like Indignado in Spain, the Occupy movement. Yeah? We've had the rise of far-right parties across Europe. And we haven't really mentioned this in the workshops here. And I think that what I've done for many years is work with social movements. And Save the Children was mentioned as a campaigning organisation. And I think we can forget just how much work, adult education work, social movements do. And I've been studying recently social movements of migrants, immigrants to the UK, etc. And traditionally, migrant groups create their own education, their own schools very often. We call them supplementary schools in Britain, where because of discrimination, etc., their children get a bad deal in school, so they set their own schools up. In the evening, weekends, Saturdays, or whatever. Yeah? Migrants and immigrants to the UK have, at present for instance, we have lots of Polish migrants to the UK in the centre of Barnsley, where I live and work, which is about 200,000 population, but it's not a major centre. In the centre of Barnsley, I just went down the other day, and on a big window is, I forgot the Polish for it, but it's the Polish library. Yeah? And it's been set up by local Polish workers with the unions, etc. It's right in the centre of Barnsley. Big red sign, the Polish library. So there's that whole tradition of migrants themselves doing it. Yeah? But I think that what I see in my role, I mean, I'm now a researcher, I suppose, more than an adult education practitioner, but it is to resource the social movements. Because we have skills, we have resources to actually support and make more effective, perhaps, work of social movements. For instance, very often we have, take the media and the problems of the message of the media. Many of us probably have organised how do we explain the media, how do we, the press, the television, etc. Yeah? Those skills of adult education, critiquing the media, are very important if you're in a social movement. Yeah? So I've done work of that kind. Also, things like what we call in Britain informal adult education that goes on. Organising meetings, yeah? Making leaflets, organising campaigns, etc. They're educational processes. And again, we can very often resource that. And I think that I see adult education, certainly in the west and north of Europe, actually came out of the trade unions, social movements, the 19th century, etc. What Marian's mentioned, really useful knowledge. I first tracked down to a newspaper in the 1830s in Britain, where workers were saying, we don't want your messages, we don't want your knowledge. We want really useful knowledge that helps us, and the word was, get out of this place. To change their worlds, to get out of where they were to where they wanted to be. And I think we sometimes forget that it is social movements, it is people who want to change the world, who get together and campaign, etc. And I think there's a place still for, not only like I do, research that and write about it, but actually working with them. And we have one small example with Save the Children today. But there are lots of NGOs, we'd sometimes call them, there are lots of campaign groups. And out there, it couldn't be a kind of more appropriate time to try and work with those social movements to change the world. Because let's face it, governments and institutions, are changing our worlds all the time, right? They're having more and more power to actually change our worlds. And I think it's social movements and the work they do, which allows us to empower people, to actually change their worlds collectively. So I think this work is very important. It's quite difficult because you have to put your head above the parapet, become visible, and that's not easy. Over the years, people lose their jobs, people get a lot of discrimination, etc., if they step out of line. Yeah? But an Australian colleague of mine called Michael Newman actually sees adult education, he puts it in his terms, is teaching defiance. Almost teaching people to have that courage, to defy, rather. Another kind of person who influenced me very much so, right back to Cambridge in 1960, was Michael Raymond Williams, who always said, whenever you hear someone say, that's common sense, challenge it, right? Actually say, no, it isn't. There are other ways of seeing it. So it's this kind of contestation of it. But I think now's the time, if you are in schools or universities or other things, that we ought to be joining with those social movements, but also actually benefiting from their experience of, just a small example, in Sheffield at present, we have lots of people from the Congo, DRC, Democratic Republic of the Congo. They set up their own education program to make people aware in the UK of what's actually been happening in the Congo now for 10 years with the Great War of Africa sort of thing. And they had this big program of, which is not the pleasantest of kind of areas of work, but it was rape and war, what was actually happening in the Congo. And they had a great effect on local people. People attended their workshops, etc. And it's in a sense that was because they were they escaped from the Congo, but they wanted to have their own education programs, not to particularly fit into the community, but to actually tell people there what they were about and their message, etc. So there's loads of kind of potential, I think, for joining with social movements and migrants, anti-racist movements, etc. And actually using our skills with them, yeah? And I think it can be very effective. And again, like Marion could talk about lots of different projects that show that is very productive work. But I think it's not only productive work at present, it's necessary work. Or else, they're going to win. Okay.
Thank you.
You want me to go now? Or
Yeah.
because my piece is about 10 minutes. Is that, do you want to do after lunch or do
That's okay.
okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to try and link this to what Marion and John have just said, because I think there is a clear link. One of the challenges that I experience as a practitioner in the services that I work with is that we have very high levels of offending behaviour, criminal behaviour in the UK. And some of the reasons for this behaviour is, in fact, lack of education, lack of motivation, low aspirations, coming from families who've had difficulties in the past. So it's a big social problem. And one of the things that we can do is we can try to teach maths and English, and that happens in prisons. We have a reasonably good educational programme in our prisons, but it doesn't always have the effect, the necessary effect, to stop young people or adults from reoffending when they get outside into the big world, because that's the behaviour that they're used to, that's the pattern that they've developed. And one of the challenges that has sort of come to me recently, working in partnership with other organisations and other colleagues, is how we can educate, especially young adults, to break this pattern and this cycle of criminal behaviour. And this is groundbreaking work in the UK. I mean, it's been around a while, but it's not really been effectively used widely or universally. And it's called restorative justice. And the way that, coming back to sort of using human resources the best way that we can, is that sometimes as a teacher, as a practitioner, you just can't do it. It's something that you can't teach because it's not a subject that you know well enough. And you have to be quite creative and innovative and look to the people that you're working with perhaps to use their skills to actually be able to pass on this knowledge, this really useful knowledge that Marion talked about. So the only way I can do this today is I can't teach you about this, so I've had to bring an English guy with me who is a new colleague and a friend of mine. And this is a DVD that he made with an organisation which is becoming a campaign in the UK. And it's 10 minutes, if it's okay.
Yeah, sure.
It's the best way I can demonstrate this. And it is really groundbreaking work. For me, it's very exciting, it's very new. I may not be able to answer all your questions about this because I'm learning, I'm still learning, it's a big learning curve for me. But I think you'll enjoy this, hopefully.
Yeah.
Thank you.